Chapter 41 of Genesis. Now, this chapter is one that a lot of people are familiar with. This is almost probably as popular as the story of Joseph and his coat of many colors. But this is the dream interpretation chapter. So some fun things we get to learn in here that I think most people haven't really thought about is how Joseph is about to interpret the Pharaoh's dream. So if you remember from the previous chapter, Joseph has been in jail. It's estimated he may have been around 3 years, possibly in jail, maybe a little bit more. But that's basically where he's at. Remember, he was sold age of 17 into slavery. He was with Potiphar for a while. Then he went to jail, became the leader of the jail to an extent while in jail, before he became the right-hand man to Pharaoh. He was, I believe, 31 when he became the right-hand man to Pharaoh, if I remember right. I think we learned that a little bit more in this chapter too. So he spent half his life serving others, basically, imprisonment or doing things like that, having these ups and downs like we've talked about. So this chapter is where Joseph does more than just save himself. He actually does some pretty profound things. So let's talk about this. Okay. So chapter 41, Pharaoh dreams of the cattle and the ears of grain. Joseph interprets the dream as 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. He proposes a grain storage program. Pharaoh makes him ruler of all Egypt. Joseph marries Asenath. He gathers grain as the sand upon the seashore. Asenath bears Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph sells grain to Egyptians and others during the famine. So this is a great famine that happens in the land that we're going to see coming up. It is estimated that the fascinating thing is this is a global famine. Okay, you remember Abraham was in a global famine. They had lots of problems, and so maybe some of those problems subsided. Things started getting a little bit better, easier during Jacob's time, and now Joseph's time. We're getting ready to go back into another famine, and this is a big one. So the beauty of some of these larger famines is oftentimes we can find things in history to help us understand when these famines happened. So this is really fascinating because we learn that in 1629 BC, there was a volcano in one of the Greek islands of Santorini. It erupts in a powerful explosion. Okay, this is the Minoan society is what's living up there in that time. Their society goes into decline after that volcano erupts. It does some serious damage. If you think of more modern day volcanoes like Mount Tambora went off in the 1800s. We have the one in south of the Philippines, Krakatoa. We have Anak Krakatoa right now, but Krakatoa went off in the 1800s, mid 1800s, and caused all kinds of problems. It's a fascinating when we talk about climate change, but yet one volcano can go off and can set off a chain reaction of events that causes all kinds of climate change globally for many, many years. In fact, it's believed the entire Black Plague came about because of a big volcano, major volcano in the Philippines area that erupted, and it blew itself up. It's a lake now, an inland lake, but it blew itself up because they can find pieces of it in ash in the ice core drillings up in the North Pole. They believe it blew itself up and possibly even caused a 3-degree cooling of the whole planet, which contributed to the explosion of the rat population, thus the flea population, which contributed to the generation of the bubonic plague and the Black Death that hit Europe. So you never know what's going to happen, but these volcanoes make a massive difference. And we're going to see that in this chapter coming up. So Pharaoh's going to have this dream. Okay, so if that's true, if that dream happens, because it is documented that volcanic eruption actually caused a 7-year famine through the entire area, through Mesopotamia, northern Africa, that whole area had a 7-year famine because of it. So if that's true, then we're probably around 1620 BC. So I had to think about that. Basically, is what's going on. So crazy stuff, or not 1620s, it'd be 1636, I think, or something like that is what it would be, because time's counting down in BC. So probably in that time frame, basically, is when Joseph is in Egypt. That's a good possibility. So, all right, verse 1, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. So Pharaoh's having this dream. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, which is actually in the Bible dictionary, it's cows, and flat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. So 7 cows come out of the river. The major river in Egypt is the Nile, okay? We know the Nile is the source of fertility, kind of seen as a fertility thing. It enriches people. So these animals, the cows come out and they eat the meadows. So the river is feeding the people. And so verse 3, and behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other cows, kine, upon the brink of the river. So now we have these cows come up. Realize the cow is actually, or the bull really, the male cow is a symbol of high importance in Egyptian literature and in their legends and things. So it represents Isis, which is, wait, I think I said that wrong. Let me double check. Let me make sure that I've got that right. The cow is, the symbol of Isis, which is the goddess of all sustaining earth. So the cow in Egyptian represents the earth, basically, and if you look at the Egyptian hieroglyphs. So now we have this idea of the Nile, which is seen as a symbol of fertility, of life-sustaining opportunities and resources. 7 cows come out, eat the grass, everything's good. 7 more cows come out, and it's bad, basically. They're not good. So verse 4, the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-flavored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. So the cows that were weak, they ended up actually eating the cows that were good. And so we were left with those cows. Pharaoh wakes up at this point. Oh, wow, that's so crazy. What's going on? So then he says here in verse 5, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears blasted with the east wind sprang up after them. So we have 1 stalk of corn and 7 ears coming off of it. And then we have another stalk, 7 thin ears come up. Basically, they're hit with the east wind, basically. So weather effects. And now verse 7, the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh woke, and behold, it was a dream. So he woke up from his first dream with the cows going, whoa, that's crazy. And then he had another dream where he saw a similar representation, but among corn. Okay, and I don't remember off the top of my head what corn symbolizes in Egyptian hieroglyphic, but it's pretty clear about cows. So this is the dream that he had. Now verse 8, this is an important part of this story here. Verse 8, it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all of the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. This is an important point to put together, okay? I've got something here to read. This is from Hugh Nibley. He's talking about this. He says, the main form of Egyptian language is Coptic from the Christians who settled in Egypt. It's basically ancient Egyptian written in Greek is what it is. So the Egyptian language that we see today and understand is called Coptic. It's basically a Greek interpretation of ancient Egyptian. We don't have the original ancient Egyptian anymore, unfortunately, just the Coptic. The Coptic word for magician is sheshperak. Shesh meaning scribe, per meaning house, and ak meaning life. The word means the scribes of the house of life, which is a theological college where priests were trained. So this word magicians that we have in here in the Old Testament is actually talking about the scribes in the house of life. That's what it's getting at here, basically. So a theological college, scholars, basically. They had many books there that were used to interpret dreams, since they believed all dreams were prophetic. There is an Egyptian papyrus in the British Museum that was used for interpreting dreams. So here's the thing that's important to realize about this is there were many, many books that they used. So these are the priests in the temples, basically. Okay, they were the ones that were in the temples that you would go to help you. They believed, it was a commonly held belief among Egyptians, that every dream had a meaning to it. There's an interpretation to it. There's something for you to learn from it. It's a message from the gods. So you would go to these priests, you would go to the temple, and you would tell them your dream, and they would look up the symbols and things to tell you what the interpretation of your dream was. So this is a big deal, okay? Not uncommon for Pharaoh to ask his magicians or these priests to come with their books and to interpret his dream. So that's an important thing here. But you realize at the end of verse 8, it says, there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. This is important. Let's go back to what Shunibli said here. He says, the dream Pharaoh had is not in the dream book. They couldn't interpret it at all. Okay, now number 7 is magical in Egypt. Okay, on Hilal Island is inscriptions that talk about 7 years where the Niles didn't rise and flood the area, thus leading to famine. The Egyptians didn't like to record their bad times either. Near the 5th dynasty, King Unas's pyramid, there are some pictures of people who look like they are very skinny from a famine. A 7-year famine is something that was known in Egypt. Remember, we talked about that volcano erupted and it caused a 7-year famine for the whole area. Everybody felt it, but we have hieroglyphs, we have information that talk about this as well. Now, if you think about it, if the Nile didn't rise, okay, the Egyptian, their history really revolves, their survival revolves around the Nile. Okay, the Nile is one of the few rivers that actually flows downhill to the north. Okay, you got to realize this, how the geography of Africa works. Most of the high mountains are in Central Africa area, and then the water, the storms come over, you get monsoons that come over from like Madagascar and into the continent and things. That's where the monsoons weather come in, and then the water runs from those mountains downhill to the north and then empties into the Mediterranean. Just like in America, we have the Rocky Mountains that run north and south, and then when the storms hit, everything that's on the east side of those mountains eventually drains into the Mississippi River. Everything on the west usually would drain out either through the Colorado rivers or Green Rivers down past, southern Utah, Nevada, Arizona out, or they go north up there as well, out through Washington, through the rivers up that way too. So Egypt, instead of having a north and south mountain range, they have an east and west mountain range right around the middle of the continent. And then everything that's north of those mountains, of course, flows downhill to the north, and that's the Nile. So what happens is the Nile is a river, and when these storms hit way south from the country of Egypt, that water drains down into these lakes, which then flows out through has outflow rivers, and so they get swollen. And so the rivers get swollen, and what happens is that stirs up a whole lot of sediment from the upper areas as well as the lower areas, and then the Nile comes down where it flattens out into the delta area at the northern end of Egypt, and then the Nile floods everything. Okay, they call it the inundation. It was actually one of the 3 seasons that Egyptians had. It inundates everything, everything gets flooded, and because there's so much dirt and silt mixed into it, it's kind of like a muddy, like a Mississippi type river. It floods everything, but it deposits this whole rich soil on the ground. And then as the flooding is done, after those storms have subsided, then the Nile settles back down to its normal flow, thus leaving all the sediment in the soil, and then all of your crops grow way better because of it. So that was in Egypt. You have the inundation period, the flood time basically is one season, then you have your growing and harvest seasons, and then you have your dry season. So that's the 3 major seasons that Egypt goes through basically. So we have documentation of this happening. This 7-year famine happens. So you got to realize, if a volcano erupts, okay, which we know there's one in 1629 that does, up in the Greek islands, just the north end of the Mediterranean from Egypt. Volcano blows up. What does a volcano do? It throws tons of ash into the air. What does all that ash do? Water particles stick to it, thus meaning clouds that would normally come over an area and dump their rain because they're so saturated with water won't dump the rain. So the storms, as that cloud of ash spews out, it eventually reaches down towards the equator, where a lot of those storms come in and dump the rain on those mountains in central southern Africa, and then which helps to cause the inundations and the floods of Nile. Those storms didn't happen. The clouds can hold more water because the ash is allowing them to have more capacity. So those clouds move on, probably dump a deluge of rain somewhere else, but not where they normally drain, and so there's not a lot of water inundating the Nile, which means it doesn't flood. And if the Nile's not flooding, then you're not getting the rich extra soil to help you in growing your crops. And thus you got a famine because your ground dries out, it's a lot of sand, and then you have more problems because you don't learn how to grow in hard times. Crops grow easy in the easy times of the inundation. So that's more of if you look at it, we can scientifically and archaeologically understand what's happening here, basically. But let's get back to this dream, okay? The priests of the temple could not interpret Pharaoh's dream, even with all these books they had about dreams and interpretations and things that they'd compiled over the years. They couldn't interpret his dream at all, which has got to be a huge shock to Pharaoh. Like, really? You guys can't interpret this dream? Like, you should be able to interpret every dream. Don't you have like volumes of books to help you interpret dreams? But you can't help me with this dream? They're stumped. What do they do? There's nothing they can do, basically. Then, verse 9, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he, we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us this young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto my office, and him he hanged. So he's going, the butler's going, you know what? I just remembered my promise. Hey, Pharaoh, remember when you sent me and the baker to jail? While we were in there, we both had a dream, and there was a guy in there, a Hebrew, that he interpreted the dreams, and they came true. He said that you would put me back up here, and he said that you would hang the baker. And it happened. He can help you with your dream. So now the Pharaoh's like, oh my gosh, there might be a possibility here. So verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. So, I mean, you're in jail. You kind of have one set of clothes. You don't really get a lot. You don't have time, they're trying to washing clothes and things. He's not shaving. He doesn't have opportunities to groom himself. So rather than look like this raggedy, straggly person, he has the time to clean up so he can approach Pharaoh, basically, and talk with him. So verse 15, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So he is saying, it's not necessarily me that's doing it. I ask God, and he helps. He gives me those interpretations, basically. So he's seeking revelation. Remember, we've talked about this. He has probably spent a lot of time in prayer, dealing with these challenges, realizing that God is there, listening to him, answering his prayers, helping him. So he's gained and built faith through all these trials and challenges that have helped him to develop a closer relationship with Christ. The closer our relationship with Christ, and this comes out in Doctrine and Covenants in the Book of Mormon, the more revelation you can have. Okay, the whole definition of revelation is the close your relationship with Christ. It really is. So those two go together. Always remember that. Your closeness to Christ and your ability to receive revelation are tied together. Those are very important. So verse 17, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of a river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed, meaning they're full, they're abundant, well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kind came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kind did eat up the first 7 fat kind. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored as the beginning. So I awoke. So even the sickly cows ate the fat cows, but still looked sickly, basically. Verse 22, and I saw in my dream and beheld 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. So this is the second dream that the Pharaoh had. Behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, or the priests, basically, but there was none that could declare it to me. Now verse 25 comes in, okay? And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one, meaning both of them mean the same thing. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. That's the first part of this. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. So the dream is one. They're both, the interpretation of both dreams is the same, basically. So, and we don't know if the story goes right into Joseph basically telling him the interpretation. Could it be that Joseph is just being inspired suddenly to tell that to him? Could be. Could it be maybe Joseph prayed, went off to meditate and pray on this, and then came back to Pharaoh? Maybe, but if that's true, then we don't know that happened because it's not telling us in here, basically, in the Old Testament. Then he says, verse 27, and the 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. So this is the full interpretation. And there shall rise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. So he's saying we're going to have 7 years of abundance, and then we're going to have 7 years of debilitating famine. In fact, so much famine that those 7 years of abundance are going to be wiped out, basically. All your savings is going to be gone because of it. So verse 32, and for the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So he's saying that it was told to you twice to emphasize that God is really going to do this. This is what's going to happen. And now, therefore, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. Let them gather all the food for those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. So this is what, so Joseph's now saying, here's what you need to do, basically, because here's the interpretation of the dream. So what does that mean? That means we need to be growing more food. We need to be storing a lot of food so that we are prepared for the 7 years of famine to survive that, basically. So that's what he's saying. You need to appoint some people to oversee this whole program, and you need to put this plan in place to help make sure this happens, basically. So verse 37, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? So Pharaoh's pretty shocked. Holy cow, this one guy, this Hebrew, so he's a stranger to us, he interpreted the dream. None of my priests or servants could figure it out at all, and he figured it out. This guy has a connection with God. There is something about this guy. So he understands that he's connected to God. Verse 39, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. So Joseph's back on top again, basically. He is back on top. He is not, I mean, he was on top in Potiphar's house, but now he actually is Potiphar's boss to an extent. He's above Potiphar. The only person higher than him is Pharaoh, and that's it. Everybody else needs to follow Joseph. Pharaoh's the only one that doesn't have to follow Joseph, basically. So Pharaoh can overrule him, and that's it. Nobody else can overrule Joseph. So he puts Joseph in, he appoints Joseph to put this whole plan in place. He's like, since you interpreted the dream, you know what you're doing with this, you're going to put this in place. You're going to make this happen. Verse 41, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. So Pharaoh basically adorns him with symbols that tell people that symbol means you are the servant with Pharaoh, and I need to kind of listen to you the same as I would as if you were Pharaoh, basically. So something that we have here, Hugh Nibley made a comment about Pharaoh's ring. He said, this ring is something that Pharaoh gives to his viceroys and showed you had authority in the kingdom. So grain was stored in large jars where you could put a lump of mud on the lid and imprint your ring in it. So this is really fascinating that Joseph gets this ring. That ring means, because it's a ring of Pharaoh, that ring means you are acting in behalf of Pharaoh. So nobody can question you, basically. They have to treat you like you're Pharaoh. And even like it says, they stored grain where you'd put the lid on it, and then they'd stick a dab of mud on the lid to seal it, and you'd imprint the ring on it, and that would leave a mark saying this is Pharaoh's grain. And then you could know if somebody broke that seal. So really fascinating. Really fascinating thing here. In fact, in verse 43 talks about bow the knee, basically. So he's telling everybody you need to pay obeisance to him. The word abrek is an Egyptian word that meant to kneel or pay homage to someone. It can also mean, may your heart be with you, or God be with you in your travels. So kind of interesting how that is talking about paying homage to somebody. Pharaoh pays homage to Joseph and basically says, go do this, okay? Verse 44, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. So telling everybody, follow Joseph, same as you'd follow me, basically. All right, verse 45, and Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, and Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. So some interesting things here. The word Zaphnath and Asenath are in Bible dictionary. You can look those up. Hugh Nibley had some interesting things to say about this, and I want to get into to understand what these mean. Hugh Nibley said, at many points, this relates to the classic story of the marriage of Joseph and Asenath, which we have in apocryphal writings too, which explains the mingling and reconciling of the blood of Ham with the blood of Israel. Because remember, Egyptians are descendant from Ham. Joseph is a descendant of Shem, the right to the priesthood, and Ham did not have that right. So by the marriage of Joseph and Asenath, they're kind of reconciling this together, basically. For Asenath, it will be recalled, was the daughter of the high priest of Heliopolis. Okay, this is really interesting because who else was the high priest of Heliopolis? Potiphar, the guy he was the servant of. So he might be actually, even though it says in here Potiphera, it actually might be that Joseph is marrying Potiphar's daughter, basically. Asenath could be Potiphar's daughter. So Joseph and Asenath maybe knew each other when he was in Potiphar's house, possibly. So let's see, and hence the pure line of Ham. She was also the wife of Joseph and the mother of our own vaunted ancestor, Ephraim. The purpose of the story is to tell how she became an Israelite and he became the heir of Pharaoh. It was the blessings that did it. The first step was for Joseph to lay his right hand upon the head of his future bride and say, Lord God, Father of Israel, who leadeth from dark to light, from error to truth, and death to life. This is a well-known Egyptian formula, basically, they did. O bless this maiden, give her life, renew her through thy Holy Ghost. In rites that follow, she renounces the luxury, splendor, and rank of an Egyptian princess, but not her parentage, and is disowned by the mass of the Egyptians. Then she is washed and clothed in white by an angel who registers her name in the book of life, with the declaration, "From this day forward, thou art newly created and formed and given a new life, eating the bread of life and receiving the anointing with the oil of immortality." More familiar Egyptian and Hebrew ordinances. So Joseph goes through the Egyptian rites to be a ruler. Asenath goes through the Hebrew rites to be a follower of Christ, basically, to be a part of their religion. And that, of course, because she did that, she kind of loses her stature in Egypt. But that's fine. So there's ordinance here. And then she's given a new name, just like Egypt gave Joseph a new name, kind of trying to look like they have the rights, but they don't really have the rights, the priesthood. Then she is given a new name. Next comes a surprise. Having been adopted into the covenant as all of Abraham's converts were, becoming the seed of Abraham by adoption, the maiden has yet to be married. And that ordinance is performed by Pharaoh himself, who, after giving the couple his blessing, crowns them with golden crowns. Laying his hands on their heads, he then pronounces the operative blessing. May the Lord, the Most High God, bless you and multiply and exalt and glorify you throughout all eternity. Then he instructs them to seal the marriage with a kiss, and the rites are completed as the whole court goes to celebrate a 7-day feast to which all the nobility of Egypt and all the kings of the nation were invited. It is only later that the couple visit Father Jacob and receive an Israelite blessing and his embraces. So there's actually, I think, a whole book called Joseph and Asenath that talks about their whole life and these ordinances and things that come together. So kind of an interesting twist and idea in there. Egypt has ordinances. Egypt's trying to look like they have the right to rule and the right to priesthood. Jacob has that actual right, and he gave that, remember, the coat of many colors, the garment of the holy priesthood, he gave to Joseph to continue those rites forward, basically. So they do the symbolic rites through Egypt, and then later they go to get the blessing from Jacob, basically the prophet, the patriarch. So some fascinating stuff, really cool stuff. Okay, verse 46, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, went through all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls. So tons of food. So probably extra rain, extra storms, great weather, things just growing like crazy everywhere. Tons of abundance. Verse 48, and he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. So wherever they were growing it, they had storehouses in all of those cities to help out. So when the famine comes, those storehouses can be used to feed the people of those cities. Verse 49, and Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. That's a lot of corn that you can't even number it. There's just so much corn. They're getting this tremendous abundance. Verse 50, and unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, or Heliopolis, basically, bare unto him. On is in the Bible dictionary. We'll look it up. It's talking about the Heliopolis, basically. Verse 51, and Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. Okay, that is in the Bible dictionary. You can look that up. For God said he hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. So that's kind of what Manasseh means, basically. He is living large. There's nobody greater than Joseph except for Pharaoh himself. So he's talk about an all-time high. He's high. He's got a great wife. He's got all the stuff happening, all kinds of things. Life is amazingly good. Even after going through all these ups and downs and all these things, life is just amazingly good. Almost to the point where he kind of forgot where he's come from, basically. Verse 52, the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Realizing, so that's kind of what Ephraim means, basically, fruitful in the land of my affliction. So just that's kind of what it means, basically. So verse 53, sorry, and the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. So now the volcano erupts up in Santorini, and it's going to spew the ash, and it's going to cause the famines to happen. Let's see. Verse 54, and 7 years of dearth began to come, or famine, basically, droughts, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So all the area around, you know, all the wanderings of Joseph's great grandfather Abraham, all those people through all of Mesopotamia, northern Egypt, probably up into Anatolia, what we would talk about as present day Europe and things, all the people in that whole area through Asia, all that area, famine. Like the whole area just had this massive famine, big problems were happening. So we learn that, again, we talk about this. This is that volcano that went up. Let's see, could also be the end of the Akkadian Empire, as well as several other ancient nations or groups. There was a widespread famine. Ash has been found near a layer of dust showing a volcano eruption, then a famine around 2200 BC. So that's another one as well. So we could say that could be it. Most likely it's Santorini, but it's amazing how one eruption can really change the world. It's just amazing. Now, verse 55, when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. So because Egypt had so much, the word spread, Egypt has a phenomenal amount of food storage saved up. You need to go to Egypt and buy food. So everybody's starting to send their emissaries, their representatives to come to say, we need to get food from you so we can do this. So, I mean, talk about cornering the market. Egypt is going to just amass a tremendous amount of wealth at this point, as they are literally feeding the known world at the time, basically. So what happens next? That's in the next chapter. So stick around for chapter 42.